Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was adopted by son of Mirko. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain in Muzdalifa didn't fall so much as it attacked. It lashed against the pavement, cold and unforgiving, washing the grime of the city into the gutters. From his perch on the edge of a rain-slicked gargoyle, Haru Usajiyama watched the neon glow of the streets below. To the public eye, or at least the very small margin of the public that knew he existed, he was the underground hero, Leapfrog. It was a terrible name. He knew it was terrible. He'd actually wanted to go by Jackalope, but the Hero Registry Office had botched the paperwork, and he'd been too lazy to file an appeal. At 25 years old, Haru was a man built of coiled tension and lean muscle, wrapped in a dark, tactical street brawler getup that prioritized function over flash. He wore a dark gray, sleeveless hoodie, a pair of reinforced cargo pants, and heavy steel-toed combat boots. He pulled his hood lower, shielding his dark, messy hair and tired crimson eyes from the downpour. He wasn't like his mother. He wasn't the roaring, laughing, bloodthirsty titan of the daylight that Rumi Usajiyama, the rabbit hero, Mirko, was. Where she was the blinding sun, kicking down doors and basking in the adoration and fear of the masses, Haru operated in the shadows. He hunted the vermin that scurried away from his mother's blinding light. Boring, she called his career choice. Efficient, he had argued. A sudden, earth-shattering boom ripped through the night air, cutting his musings short. The shockwave hit a second later, rattling the brickwork of the building beneath him, and nearly knocking him off his perch. A brilliant, sickening bloom of orange and red fire erupted 3 blocks to the east, tearing through the gloomy, rain-swept skyline. Haru's eyes widened. That wasn't a gas leak. That was a quirk, instinct, honed by years of brutal training under Japan's most aggressive hero, took over. Haru dropped from the gargoyle. He let himself free-fall for 3 stories, the wind roaring in his ears. Just before he hit the pavement, his quirk flared to life. Kinetic rebound. The moment his steel-toed boots struck the asphalt, he didn't shatter his legs. Instead, his quirk absorbed the massive kinetic energy of his fall, storing it in the muscles and tendons of his thighs and calves. The concrete beneath him spiderwebbed with cracks. He bent his knees, harnessing the stored energy, and pushed. With a sound like a cannon firing, Haru launched himself forward. He cleared an entire city block in a single, parabolic arc, moving so fast he was nothing but a blurred shadow against the rain. He hit the side of an office building, absorbed the horizontal impact, and rebounded again, ricocheting through the city streets like a pinball of pure, concentrated force. He reached the source of the explosion in less than 30 seconds. It was a residential apartment complex. Or at least, it used to be. The bottom 3 floors had been blown out, leaving the upper 5 stories groaning and shifting, leaning precariously as gravity threatened to finish what the villain had started. Smoke billowed into the rain, thick and choking. Sirens were wailing in the distance, but they were minutes away. Minutes the people inside didn't have. Hey! Pro-hero! Haru shouted, flashing his license to a stunned, bleeding police officer who had been patrolling nearby. Perimeter! Keep people back! This thing is coming down! Without waiting for a response, Haru bolted into the flaming ruins. The heat was immediate and oppressive, singeing the edges of his hoodie. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, pulverized drywall, and burning plastic. Hello? He roared, his voice echoing over the crackle of flames and the agonizing groan of shifting steel. Is anyone in here? He bounded up the remnants of the stairwell, skipping entire flights with his quirk. First floor empty. Second floor empty. Third floor. A desperate, high-pitched cry pierced the noise. Haru pivoted, sprinting down a hallway filled with falling debris. The floor was slanted at a terrifying 30-degree angle. He slid toward an apartment where the door had been blown entirely off its hinges. Inside, the living room ceiling had caved in. A massive slab of reinforced concrete, likely part of the load-bearing support for the upper floors, had collapsed. Beneath it lay a woman with vibrant green hair. She was pinned from the waist down. Her face was pale, smeared with soot and blood, but her arms were wrapped fiercely, desperately, around a tiny, sobbing figure tucked beneath her chest, shielded from the crushing weight of the rubble. "Mommy! Mommy, please!" the little boy wailed. He had the same mess of green curls, his large eyes overflowing with tears, completely uninjured thanks to his mother's body acting as a shield. "Hey! Hold on!" Haru yelled, dropping to his knees beside them. He grabbed the edge of the concrete slab, his muscles bulging as he tried to pry it up. "I'm a hero! I've got you, just hold on!" He strained, gritting his teeth as he tried to channel the ambient kinetic energy from the collapsing building into his arms, but his quirk was strictly leg-based. Without the leverage to use his lower body, he was just a very strong man trying to lift a 5-ton slab. It didn't budge an inch. The woman coughed, a terrible, wet sound. Her green eyes shifted to Haru, filled with a terrifying, absolute clarity. She knew, H-Hero. She rasped, her voice trembling. "Don't speak, ma'am. I'm going to get you out," Haru lied, his heart hammering against his ribs. He positioned his back against the rubble, trying to leg press it upward. The slab shifted a fraction of a millimeter, but the ceiling above them groaned, raining dust. If he lifted it wrong, the entire structure above would pancake them all. "No," the woman said, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "You can't. I can't feel my legs. My chest. Mommy!" The little boy sobbed, clinging to her shirt. "Izuku, my sweet baby," she murmured, pressing a bloody kiss to the boy's forehead. "It's going to be okay. Mommy loves you so much. Stop talking like that." Haru snapped, panic finally bleeding into his usually calm demeanor. "I can get you both. Just give me a second to figure this." A massive shudder tore through the building. The floor beneath them dropped another 6 inches. The angle steepened. The structural integrity was completely gone. They had seconds. The woman looked up at Haru. The plea in her eyes hit him harder than any physical blow he had ever taken. "Take him," Inko Midoriya begged, her tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. "Please. Just save my baby." Haru froze. The hero in him screamed to save everyone. To be like All Might. To be like his mother, who would surely find a way to smash the concrete into dust and carry them both out. But he wasn't them, he was Haru. And he was out of time. The ceiling gave a deafening crack. "I'm sorry," Haru whispered, his voice breaking. He reached under the woman, grabbing the screaming, thrashing boy. "No! No! Mommy!" Izuku shrieked, fighting with all the strength his tiny 5-year-old body possessed as Haru ripped him away from his mother's arms. "Be a good boy, Izuku," Inko smiled, even as the light began to fade from her eyes. Haru tucked the boy against his chest, wrapping his arms securely around the child's small body. He channeled every ounce of kinetic energy he could muster into his legs. "Forgive me," he thought. He leaped backward just as the ceiling gave way. Haru crashed through the apartment's glass window, bursting out into the rainy night, holding the boy tight against him. Behind them, the building folded in on itself with a roar like a dying beast, an avalanche of concrete, steel, and dust swallowing the green-haired woman whole. Haru landed heavily on the street below, the impact shattering the pavement beneath his boots. He rolled to dissipate the force, ensuring the boy took none of the shock. But as Haru came to a halt, kneeling in the rain, the only sound that echoed in his ears wasn't the sirens, or the falling debris. It was the agonizing, soul-tearing scream of a 5-year-old boy whose entire world had just ended. Haru held the thrashing child, pressing the boy's face into his shoulder so he wouldn't look at the rubble. Haru stared at the collapsed building, the rain mixing with the soot on his face, feeling colder than he ever had in his life. He hadn't been fast enough. 4 months later, the Muzurifu Child Welfare Center was a place that smelled permanently of bleach, boiled cabbage, and despair. The walls were painted an offensive shade of pale yellow, likely intended to be cheerful, but over time had faded into the color of a bruised, sickly lemon. 5-year-old Izuku Midoriya sat in the corner of the communal playroom. He was small for his age, with an unruly mop of dark green curls and large, emerald eyes that used to sparkle with endless curiosity. Now they were dull. Vacant. He held a battered All Might action figure in his lap. One of its arms was missing. It had been broken 2 weeks ago by an older boy named Daisuke, whose quirk allowed him to harden his knuckles into stone. What's a quirkless loser like you need a hero toy for? Daisuke had sneered, ripping the arm off. You're never gonna be one. You're broken. Just like your toy. Izuku hadn't fought back. He hadn't even cried. Crying was something he used to do when his mother was there to wipe the tears away. Here, crying just made the other kids hit him harder, and it made the tired, overworked caretakers sigh with annoyance. The diagnosis had come a month after he arrived at the orphanage. The caretakers had taken him to the doctor to register his quirk, hoping a flashy power might make him more appealing to prospective adoptive parents. Instead, the doctor had pointed to the X-ray of his foot. 2 joints in his pinky toe, quirkless, an evolutionary dead end. A genetic zero. In a world where 80% of the population possessed a superpower, Izuku was a glass bottle in a world of hammers. Word had spread quickly through the orphanage. Then, it spread through his kindergarten. Even Kaken, Katsuki Bakugo, the boy who had once been his closest friend, had turned on him. When Izuku had returned to school after the funeral, Kaken had pushed him into the dirt, showing off his new explosion quirk, calling him Deku. Useless. Izuku slowly traced a painted smile on his all-might figure with his thumb. You can be a hero too, Izuku. That's what his mother had said. Before the fire. Before the crushing weight. Before the man in the dark clothes had taken him away. Izuku closed his eyes, leaning his head against the cold plaster wall. He wished the man had left him there. Outside the playroom, in the sterile hallway, Haru Usujiyama stood talking to the facilities director. Haru looked out of place. He wasn't in his hero gear, but even in civilian clothes, a simple white t-shirt, a worn leather jacket, and loose cargo pants, he radiated a quiet, dangerous intensity that made the balding director sweat. Midoriya, yes, the director said, shuffling through a manila folder. He's a quiet boy. Very polite. But Mr. Usujiyama, I feel I should be transparent with you. His file has a rather significant mark against it. A mark? Haru asked, his crimson eyes narrowing. He crossed his arms over his chest. What, does the kid have a criminal record at 5? No. Nothing of the sort, the director stammered, adjusting his glasses. It's a medical condition. He was diagnosed 3 months ago. The boy is quirkless. Haru blinked. He looked through the reinforced glass window into the playroom. He spotted the mop of green hair immediately. The boy was isolated. The other children were playing loudly in the center of the room, showing off minor quirks, floating blocks, changing skin colors, producing small sparks. Izuku was pushed as far away from them as possible, curling into a tight, defensive ball. Haru saw the fading yellow bruise on the boy's cheekbone. Quirkless, Haru repeated, his voice dangerously soft. And I suppose that makes him undesirable in the system? Well, yes, the director admitted, wincing. Most families want a child whose quirk matches their own, or something they can relate to. A quirkless child requires a different kind of care, and frankly, with his trauma, Haru stopped listening. He stared at the boy. For the past 4 months, Haru had not slept a full night. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in that collapsing building. He felt the weight of the concrete he couldn't lift. He saw the green-haired woman's eyes. He heard the boy's screams. Haru had tried to move on. He had thrown himself into his patrol work, busting 3 smuggling rings and stopping a dozen muggings. But it felt hollow. He was a hero who had failed. He couldn't save her, but he could look at the boy. Without another word to the director, Haru pushed the door open and stepped into the playroom. The noise of the children died down instantly. They stared at the tall, imposing man with red eyes and a permanent scowl. Haru ignored them. He walked straight to the corner and crouched down, his boots squeaking slightly on the linoleum. Izuku didn't look up. He just pulled his knees tighter to his chest, bracing himself. He thought he was in trouble. Hey, Haru said. His voice, usually gruff and sarcastic, was startlingly gentle. Izuku flinched, slowly raising his head. His dull emerald eyes locked onto Haru's crimson ones. Izuku's breath hitched. He recognized the man. He recognized the jawline, the messy dark hair. You! Izuku whispered, his voice hoarse from lack of use. You were there. I was, Haru said, not breaking eye contact. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say I'm sorry for your loss. He knew from experience those words were less than worthless. My hero name is Leapfrog. My real name is Haru. Izuku looked down at the broken All Might toy in his hands. You didn't save her. It wasn't said with malice. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a heartbreaking statement of fact. Haru swallowed the lump of ash in his throat. He nodded once. I didn't. I wasn't strong enough. Izuku looked back up, surprised. Adults didn't usually admit they were weak. Especially not heroes. They say I'm not strong enough, either, Izuku whispered, his lower lip trembling slightly. The doctor said I don't have a quirk. The other kids say I'm useless. Kaken says I'm a Deku. Haru glanced at the bruise on Izuku's cheek. He felt a sudden, violent surge of protectiveness, a spark of the feral rage he had inherited from his mother. He suppressed it, keeping his face calm. Do you believe them? Haru asked. Izuku looked at the broken toy. A single tear escaped, cutting a clean line down his dusty cheek. I don't know. I want to be a hero. Like All Might. Like you? But, can I be a hero if I don't have a quirk? It was the ultimate question. The question that would define the boy's entire life. Haru could have lied. He could have smiled and said, Of course you can, kid. Anyone can be a hero. But Haru was an underground hero. He knew what the streets were like. He knew villains who could rip a man in half with a thought, or melt bone with a touch. No, Haru said bluntly. Izuku's eyes widened, and fresh tears welled up. The final nail in the coffin. Not the way you are now, Haru continued, leaning in closer. A quirk is a tool, kid. It's a weapon. And right now, you're going into a gunfight without a gun. If you try to fight a villain like that, you will die. Izuku sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand, looking utterly defeated. But Haru said, reaching out to gently poke the center of Izuku's chest. A quirk isn't what makes a hero. A quirk just makes it easier. If you don't have a quirk, it means you have to be smarter. It means you have to be faster. It means you have to hit harder, train longer, and bleed more than anyone else. Izuku stared at him, his breath catching. It means you have to fight dirty, Haru said, a small, genuine smirk touching his lips. It means you have to learn martial arts. It means you have to build your body until it's a weapon all on its own. You have a massive disadvantage, kid. I won't lie to you. But impossible? No. Izuku's hands tightened around the plastic toy. The dullness in his eyes flickered, replaced by a tiny, fragile spark of something else. Something dangerous. Something Haru recognized. Hope. Can someone teach me? Izuku asked, his voice shaking. I can, Haru said. The decision had been hovering in the back of his mind for months, but looking at the fire rekindling in this tiny, battered kid's eyes, it finally cemented itself. If you want me to, Izuku hesitated. Why? Because, Haru sighed, running a hand through his hair. I owe your mother. And because I think the world needs more heroes who know what it feels like to be powerless. Haru stood up, offering his hand to the 5-year-old. Come on, kid. Let's get out of here. Izuku looked at the large, calloused hand. He looked back at the other children, who were watching in stunned silence. Then, slowly, Izuku reached out and placed his tiny hand in Haru's. 20 minutes later, Haru was sitting in the director's office, aggressively signing a stack of paperwork. Because he was a fully licensed pro-hero with a spotless criminal record, a steady, if modest, government income, and highly influential connections, which he hated using, but would for this. The red tape that usually entangled the foster system evaporated. The director stamped the final page, looking bewildered. I suppose congratulations are in order, Mr. Yusujiyama. You are now the legal guardian of Izuku Midoriya. Haru stood up, taking the paperwork and shoving it into his jacket. He looked down at the green-haired boy standing by his leg. Let's go home, Izuku, Haru said. The drive across town was quiet. Haru owned an old, beat-up sedan that smelled faintly of coffee and Jim's sweat. Izuku sat in the booster seat in the back, staring out the rain-streaked window. He didn't know how to feel. His mother was gone. The painful, lonely orphanage was gone. Now, he belonged to the man who had pulled him from the rubble. We're going to have to set some ground rules, Haru said, glancing at Izuku in the rearview mirror. First, my apartment is a mess. Ignore it. Second, I work weird hours. Sometimes I'll be out at night. I'll have a babysitter watch you until you're older. Third, I don't really know how to be a dad. So, we're going to figure this out together. Deal? Izuku nodded slowly. Deal, Mr. Haru? Just Haru is fine, he replied. Or whatever you want. They pulled up to a modest apartment complex in a decent, quiet part of town. Haru led Izuku up to the third floor and unlocked the door to apartment 304. Haru hadn't lied. The place was a disaster. There were workout weights scattered across the living room floor, stacks of case files piled on the coffee table, and a half-eaten box of pizza on the kitchen counter. Sorry about the mess, Haru muttered, kicking a dumbbell under the couch. Your room is down the hall. Second door on the left. I haven't decorated it or anything. It just has a bed and a dresser. We can go buy some posters or whatever tomorrow. Izuku took off his bright red shoes at the entryway, lining them up perfectly. He walked down the hall and peeked into the room. It was bare, the walls painted a neutral beige, but there was a warm quilt on the bed, and it smelled like fresh laundry, not bleach. It was a sanctuary. Thank you, Izuku whispered, clutching his broken All Might figure. Haru leaned against the doorframe, shoving his hands into his pockets. He felt a profound, terrifying weight settle onto his shoulders. He was responsible for this kid, a quirkless, traumatized kid who wanted to be a hero. He had absolutely no idea what he was doing. Before he could offer any more reassuring words, a sound like a bomb detonating echoed from the front of the apartment. Crash! The entire building shook. Izuku shrieked, dropping his toy and diving under the bed, throwing his hands over his head. His mind instantly flashed back to the collapsing building, the fire, his mother. Izuku, it's okay. It's not a villain! Haru yelled, though he sounded more exasperated than panicked. He rubbed his temples, letting out a long, suffering sigh. I told her to use her keys. Haru walked back to the living room. The front door of his apartment was no longer attached to its hinges. It lay flat on the floor, splintered down the middle. Standing in the doorway, framed by the hall lights, was a woman who commanded the absolute attention of every atom in the room. She was tall, muscular, and impossibly athletic. She had dark skin, startlingly bright red eyes that perfectly matched Haru's, and a shock of thick, wild white hair that cascaded down her back. Two long, white rabbit ears twitched atop her head. She was wearing her hero costume, a white leotard with a crescent moon emblem, dark purple thigh-high boots, and metal plating on her forearms. She looked feral. She looked powerful. She was Rumi Yasujiyama, the number 5 pro hero, Mirko. Haru! She bellowed, her voice echoing off the walls. She stepped into the apartment, crunching over the shattered wood of the door. What the hell is this bullshit my agency just forwarded to me? Hello, mother, Haru said dryly, crossing his arms. I see you're still allergic to doorknobs. Don't get smart with me, brat, Mirko snapped, marching up to him and jabbing a finger into his chest. She waved a crumpled piece of paper in his face. It was a copy of the adoption registry. The Hero Commission flagged this. Since when do 25-year-old single men adopt random kids from the system? Did you get a girl knocked up and she dumped the kid on you? Is this a scandal? No, Haru sighed. He's not biologically mine. I adopted him. Why? Mirko demanded, throwing her hands up. You can barely take care of your damn houseplants. You live on instant ramen and spite. You're an underground hero. You're always getting stabbed. You can't raise a kid. I'm going to manage, Haru said, his voice hardening slightly. He needed a home. And I owed him one. Mirko stopped. Her animalistic instincts picked up on the shift in her son's tone. She narrowed her crimson eyes, studying his face. She saw the guilt there. She remembered the news report from 4 months ago. The building collapse. The woman who died. Is this the kid from the fire? She asked, her voice dropping an octave, losing the screaming anger but keeping the intense edge. Yes. He got a quirk? No, Haru said evenly. He's quirkless. Mirko stared at him as if he had just grown a second head. You adopted a quirkless kid with trauma. Yes. Where is he? In his room. Don't scare him, Rumi, Mirko scoffed, shoving past her son. I don't scare people. I build character. She stomped down the hallway, her heavy boots making the floorboards vibrate. She reached the open door of the spare bedroom and peered inside. The room looked empty, but her rabbit ears twitched, picking up the frantic, rapid heartbeat of a small creature hiding underneath the bed. Come out, Mirko commanded, not raising her voice, but speaking with the absolute authority of an apex predator. Slowly, shakily, a tiny figure crawled out from under the bed frame. Izuku stood up, his knees trembling so hard they were practically knocking together. He recognized her. He was a hero nerd. He knew every stat, every fight, every ranking. This was Mirko, the rabbit hero. The woman who routinely crushed villains' skulls between her thighs. Izuku was terrified. He was 5 years old, completely powerless, and standing in front of a living weapon. Mirko stepped into the room. She towered over him. She crouched down, bringing her face inches away from his. Her fierce red eyes bored into his dull green ones, searching for something. Searching for weakness. Izuku's breath hitched. His heart hammered wildly against his ribs. Every instinct in his tiny body screamed at him to look away, to cry, to submit to the overwhelming pressure she radiated. She smelled like sweat, ozone, and danger, but Izuku remembered what Haru had said at the orphanage. If you don't have a quirk, you have to be smarter. Faster. You have to fight dirty. If he was going to be a hero, he couldn't run away. Even if he was scared. Especially if he was scared. Izuku clenched his tiny fists at his sides. He stopped trembling. He tilted his chin up, refusing to break eye contact with the towering pro-hero. He stared directly into Mirko's crimson eyes, holding his ground, his jaw set in a stubborn, fragile line of absolute defiance. Silence stretched in the room for 5 long seconds. Haru stood in the doorway, tensed, ready to intervene if his mother said something to break the boy. Suddenly, Mirko threw her head back and barked a loud, sharp laugh. Ha! She stood up, her wild white hair swishing around her shoulders. She looked at Haru, pointing a thumb at the tiny green-haired boy. I thought you said he was quirkless. Mirko grinned, a wide, predatory, deeply approving smile showing off her sharp canines. He is, Haru said cautiously. Bullshit, Mirko laughed, crossing her muscular arms. She looked back down at Izuku, her eyes practically shining with amusement and respect. Nobody looks at me like that unless they've got fire in their blood. The kid's practically vibrating, but he didn't blink. He didn't back down. She leaned forward, ruffling Izuku's green curls so aggressively it almost knocked him over. He's got guts, Mirko declared. She flashed Izuku a feral grin. Welcome to the Warren, kid. Izuku stood there, stunned, his hair sticking up in every direction. The paralyzing fear in his chest began to ebb, replaced by a strange, overwhelming sense of warmth. He looked at Haru, who let out a long breath and gave Izuku a small, reassuring smile. Are you going to teach him how to fight? Mirko asked Haru, her tone suddenly shifting to business. Eventually. He needs to heal first. Screw healing, Mirko scoffed. If the world's going to beat him up for being quirkless, we need to teach him how to hit back harder. Tomorrow morning. 5 a.m. We're starting with pain tolerance and cardio. He's 5. Haru protested. I am not letting you dropkick my son. He's in Usajiyama now. Mirko yelled back, though she was still grinning. He's gonna learn to kick so hard he breaks the sound barrier. Or I'm legally changing your name back to Jackalope. As the two adult heroes began to loudly bicker over training regimens and proper parenting techniques, Izuku bent down and picked up his broken All Might action figure from the floor. He looked at the plastic toy. Then he looked at his new father, and the terrifying, boisterous woman who was apparently his new grandmother, though he instinctively knew he should never call her that out loud. Izuku Midoriya had lost everything. The world had told him he was useless. It had told him he was a broken thing, destined to be a victim. But standing in this chaotic, loud apartment, Izuku squeezed his fists. He felt the first spark of something new taking root in his chest. It wasn't the blind, innocent optimism of the boy who used to watch All Might videos on repeat. It was something sharper. Something fiercer. He was going to be a hero. And he was going to kick the world's teeth in until it let him. The alarm clock on Izuku Midoriya's nightstand didn't ring. It roared. It was a custom-made piece of hardware, a gag gift from Mirko on his 8th birthday, programmed to blur the sound of an artillery strike at exactly 4:30 a.m. A hand, small but thoroughly callous, shot out from beneath the dark green comforter and slammed the snooze button with enough force to crack the plastic casing. Izuku groaned, rolling over. He was 10 years old now, 5 years removed from the day his world had collapsed, and 5 years into his life as an Usajiyama. The room around him was a chaotic, beautiful testament to his dual nature. The walls were plastered in a dizzying array of pro-hero posters. All Might took center stage, naturally, his booming smile radiating over the bed. But flanking the symbol of peace were dynamic, action-shot posters of Mirko mid-kick, edge-shot folding into a sliver of paper, an eraser head caught in a rare, blurry tabloid photo. A meticulously organized bookshelf groaned under the weight of 15 different volumes of hero analysis for the future, their spines worn from constant use. Izuku threw off the covers and stood up in the dark, chilly room. If anyone from his old life, his old kindergarten, or the brief, terrible month at the orphanage, saw him now, they wouldn't recognize him. He was still undeniably small for his age, lacking the broad shoulders or sudden growth spurts of his peers. He still had the same unruly mop of dark green hair and the constellation of freckles across his cheeks. But beneath his oversized sleep shirt, the changes were profound. Izuku stretched, raising his arms above his head, and the muscles in his back and shoulders shifted with striking definition. His arms were lean, packed with coiled, dense muscle built from thousands of hours of repetitive stress. His shins and forearms bore a map of faint, silvery scars, souvenirs from missed landings, scraped concrete, and the brutal reality of training without a defensive quirk. He didn't just look different. He felt different. The fragile, trembling boy made of glass had been shattered and reforged in the fires of the Usajiyama household. He pulled on a pair of dark sweatpants, laced up a heavily reinforced pair of red running shoes with thick, shock-absorbing soles, and stepped out into the living room. Haru was already there, leaning against the kitchen counter, sipping from a mug of black coffee that smelled like battery acid. The underground hero looked as tired as ever, his crimson eyes half-lidded, dark bags hanging beneath them. He wore his usual gray workout gear. "Morning, kid," Haru grunted, taking a long sip. "Legs feel okay after yesterday's drills?" Izuku bounced on the balls of his feet, testing the tension in his calves. "A little tight in the left hamstring, but the lactic acid is gone. If I adjust my strike angle by 3 degrees on the landing, it should alleviate the pressure on the tendon." Haru smirked, shaking his head. "Only you could make a morning jog sound like a physics dissertation. Come on. 5 miles today. We're taking the Skyline route." "Right." Izuku beamed. They stepped out into the crisp, pre-dawn air of Mizudafu. The city was still asleep, bathed in the soft, indigo glow of the streetlights. For the first half-mile, they stayed on the pavement, keeping a steady, grueling pace that would have left most high school athletes winded. Izuku matched Haru's stride for stride, his breathing controlled, a perfect two-in, two-out rhythm Haru had drilled into him since he was 6. Then, the real training began. "Up," Haru commanded, not breaking his stride. Izuku didn't hesitate. He veered right, sprinting toward a brick wall separating an alleyway from a commercial district. 2 steps from the wall, Izuku launched himself, his red shoe planted against the rough brick, his momentum carrying him upward. He pushed off the wall, twisted in midair, grabbed the rusty iron railing of a fire escape, and hauled himself up in one fluid, seamless motion. Haru followed, using a fraction of his kinetic rebound quirk to bounce lightly over the gap, landing silently next to his adopted son. From there, the city became a playground. Parkour was the foundation of Izuku's survival toolkit. Haru had made it abundantly clear, if you fight a villain with a strength enhancement quirk head-on, you lose. Your greatest weapon isn't your fists, Izuku. It's your environment. They bounded across the flat, tar-paper roofs of apartment complexes. Izuku vaulted over AC units, slid under low-hanging exhaust pipes, and leaped across 4-foot alleyway gaps with a terrifying lack of hesitation. As they ran, The analytical side of Izuku's brain, the side that muttered and obsessed, was constantly churning. Haru, look, Izuku said between breaths, pointing down at a street corner where a police cruiser was idling. That's the route Death Arms usually takes on his Tuesday morning patrol, but he's not there. They must have shifted his perimeter because of the sludge villain sightings in the neighboring ward. If he's covering the east sector, that leaves a blind spot right here. Focus on your footwork, nerd, not the hero logistics, Haru scolded gently, though a proud smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You're dragging your right heel. Keep your weight on the balls of your feet. If the roof gives out, you need to be able to spring back, not fall through. Right. Sorry. Izuku corrected his posture immediately. An hour later, they returned to the apartment complex, covered in sweat and breathing hard. They didn't go inside. Instead, Haru led Izuku to the small, fenced-in communal backyard behind the building. Haru had long since bribed the landlord to let him set up a makeshift dojo back there, complete with heavy bags, wooden striking posts, and a sprawling set of thick, interlocking foam mats. All right, Haru said, tossing his jacket aside and stepping onto the mats. Combat drills. Let's see your Jinga. Izuku stepped onto the mats, his expression shifting. The sweet, nerdy boy vanished, replaced by a hyper-focused martial artist. He dropped into a low, swaying stance. Capoeira. When Haru had first started teaching Izuku how to fight, they quickly realized traditional boxing or wrestling was useless. Izuku lacked the mass to grapple, and throwing punches without a quirk to reinforce his bones against superpowered enemies was a guaranteed way to shatter his hands. So, Haru looked to his own leg-based fighting style, and his mother's devastating kicks, and tailored a curriculum specifically for a quirkless fighter. Capoeira offered constant, unpredictable movement, making Izuku an impossible target to hit. It relied on momentum, centrifugal force, and utilizing the entire body's weight behind every strike, culminating in devastating kicks that didn't require raw, brute strength. Combined with the direct, lightning-fast precision of Taekwondo, Izuku's lower body had become a weapon. Haru threw a slow, sweeping kick aimed at Izuku's waist. Izuku didn't block. Blocking meant absorbing force, and absorbing force broke bones. Instead, he dropped into a fluid crouch, letting the kick sail inches over his head, and used the momentum of his dodge to plant his hands on the mat. He spun his body like a top, lashing his right leg out in a sweeping arc aimed at Haru's shins. Haru hopped over the sweep, stepping back. Good. Faster. Don't think about the dodge, let your body read my shoulders. Again. For 40 minutes, the backyard was filled with the rhythmic slapping of bare feet on foam, the sharp exhalations of breath, and the heavy thuds of Izuku driving his shins into the leather-heavy bags. Izuku was midair, executing a flawless 540-degree tornado kick against the heavy bag, when the wooden gate of the backyard exploded inward. Splinters of wood rained across the grass. Izuku landed perfectly, but immediately dropped into a defensive crouch, his heart spiking. Haru didn't even flinch. He just pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. I literally fixed that gate yesterday, Haru muttered. Yo! Bellowed a voice that commanded the morning air. Mirko strode through the shattered remains of the gate. She was in her civilian clothes today, a tight black tank top, baggy gray sweatpants, and a massive duffel bag slung over one incredibly muscular shoulder. Her white rabbit ears twitched, picking up the sounds of their elevated heart rates, and a ferocious grin split her face. Mother, Haru said, his voice dripping with exhaustion. We talked about using the latch. Latches are for people who don't have places to be, Haru, Mirko dismissed, dropping the duffel bag on the grass with a heavy, metallic thud that suggested it was filled with Andals rather than gym clothes. She unzipped it, tossing a massive bag of carrots and 3 enormous tubs of whey protein onto the patio table. Groceries. You're welcome. She turned her sharp, crimson eyes toward the mat. Hey, Squirt. Good morning, Mirko. Izuku chimed, immediately bowing at a perfect 90-degree angle. He had learned very early on that if he called her grandma, she would hang him by his ankles from the 3rd-story balcony. Look at you, sweating like a pig already? Mirko laughed, cracking her knuckles. The sound was like pistol shots. Haru's going easy on you. He's making you soft. You learning how to dance? Or you learning how to fight? Izuku swallowed hard. Capoeira relies on rhythmic evasion. I don't care what it relies on. I asked if it can break a jaw, Mirko interrupted, stepping out of her sandals and walking onto the foam mats. Haru groaned. Rumi, no. He has school in 2 hours. I am not sending him to 4th grade with a concussion. He won't get a concussion if he ducks, Mirko grinned savagely. She didn't drop into a stance. She just stood perfectly relaxed, her arms hanging loose. But Izuku could see it, the terrifying, absolute lack of openings. Come on, kid. 5 minutes. Hit me once, and I'll buy you that limited edition All Might hoodie you were drooling over online. Izuku's eyes widened. The hoodie was impossible to find. You're on, Izuku said, his voice dropping an octave. Haru stepped off the mat, knowing better than to get between a Usujiyama and a bet. Don't kill him, Rumi. I'll just maim him a little, she promised. Without any warning, the air cracked. Mirko didn't run, she vanished. Izuku's eyes couldn't track her. But his body, honed by years of surviving these exact ambushes, reacted on pure instinct. He threw himself backward, going entirely limp just as Mirko's heel cleaved through the empty space where his head had been a millisecond prior. The wind pressure from her kick alone ruffled his dark hair. Izuku hit the mat and instantly rolled, using the momentum to spring back to his feet. He didn't retreat. He dashed forward, closing the distance to get inside her incredible leg reach. He threw a feint with his left shoulder, pretending to aim a punch, before dropping his weight and launching a blistering taekwondo roundhouse aimed at her ribs. Smack! Mirko caught his ankle with one hand, barely looking down. Her grip felt like a steel vice. Too slow, she grinned. With a flick of her wrist, she hurled Izuku across the yard. Izuku flew 10 feet through the air, but he didn't panic. He tucked his chin, rotated his hips, and hit the grass in a perfect shoulder roll, popping back to his feet instantly. His side ached, and his ankle throbbed, but he was grinning. Not bad, kid, Mirko chuckled, genuinely impressed. Most pro heroes would have broken their necks taking that throw. But you're playing too nice. You're fighting like a hero in a comic book. She began to pace around the edge of the mat, her red eyes locked on him like a wolf circling a rabbit. You're quirkless, Izuku, Mirko said, her voice losing its mocking edge, replaced by a fierce, terrifying intensity. Out there in the real world, villains aren't going to pull their punches. They aren't going to fight fair. They're going to use fire, ice, acid, and mind control. If you play by the rules, you will die. She suddenly lunged, closing the gap in an instant, throwing a sweeping low kick. Izuku jumped over it, but Mirko used the momentum to spin into a high crescent kick. Izuku brought his arms up in a crossguard. The impact rattled his bones, sending him sliding backward on the mats. If they push you, Mirko barked, pressing the offensive, throwing a flurry of jabs that Izuku desperately parried. You don't just push back. What do you do, Izuku? I bite their hand off. Izuku yelled, his voice cracking slightly with exertion. He slipped under a wide hook, planted his hands on the mat, and executed a brutal, spinning heel kick aimed directly at the back of Mirko's knee, the only place a fighter with her leg strength would be vulnerable. Mirko's eyes widened a fraction of an inch. She hopped on one foot, narrowly avoiding the strike. Izuku didn't stop. He used the rotational force to transition into a sweeping back kick, his heel grazing the fabric of Mirko's sweatpants before she leaped backward, putting 10 feet between them. Mirko landed, looking down at the scuff mark on her pants. Silence fell over the backyard. Izuku stood panting, his chest heaving, his fists raised, waiting for the retaliation. Instead, Mirko threw her head back and laughed. It was a bright, echoing sound that filled the morning air. A graze, she announced, pointing at him. You grazed the number 5 hero. Holy hell, Haru, you might actually be doing something right. Haru smirked from the sidelines. I told you his footwork is getting better. Mirko walked over and ruffled Izuku's sweaty green hair, her touch surprisingly gentle despite the sheer power hidden in her hands. Good job, pup. You're vicious. I like it. Keep that up, and you might actually survive middle school. Izuku beamed, his chest swelling with pride. Praise from Mirko was rarer than gold, and twice as valuable. Does this mean I get the hoodie? Don't push your luck, brat, Mirko snorted, though the smile never left her face. Now go shower. You smell like a wet dog. Aldera Elementary School was a battleground of a different sort. At 10 years old, the social hierarchy was already carved in stone, governed by a brutal, Darwinian system where quirks dictated your worth. At the very top of that food chain sat Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo was a prodigy. His quirk, Explosion, was flashy, powerful, and inherently violent. He was athletic, loud, and possessed an ego fueled by constant praise from teachers and peers alike. He was destined for greatness, and everyone knew it. At the absolute bottom of that food chain used to sit Izuku Midoriya, but things had changed. The morning bell rang, signaling recess. Izuku sat under the shade of an old oak tree near the edge of the playground, completely isolated from the rest of the class. He didn't mind the isolation. It was quiet here. He had a brand new notebook resting on his knees, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 6, and he was furiously sketching a diagram of the pro-hero Kamui Wood's preemptive binding chains. He could hear the other kids playing soccer, their minor quirks sparking and flashing across the field. He also heard the distinct, heavy crunch of boots on gravel heading his way. 3 sets of footsteps. 1 leading, 2 following. Izuku didn't look up from his notebook. He casually adjusted his posture, ensuring his legs were uncrossed and his center of gravity was balanced. Hey, Deku, a harsh, arrogant voice sneered. Katsuki Bakugo stood towering over him, flanked by 2 of his lackeys, a boy with elongated, glowing fingers, and a larger boy with a minor hardening quirk. Bakugo's hands were stuffed into the pockets of his shorts, a smirk plastered across his face. 5 years ago, Izuku would have flinched. He would have stuttered, shrinking into himself, terrified of the loud, explosive boy who used to be his best friend. Now, Izuku calmly finished shading Kamui's wooden arm, clicked his pen shut, and slowly looked up. His emerald eyes were completely devoid of fear. There was no cowering. There was just a calm, analytical coolness that deeply, fundamentally infuriated Bakugo. Hello, Kaken, Izuku said softly, his voice even. Did you need something? Bakugo's eye twitched. It was that look. That damn blank, fearless look. For years, Bakugo had tried to put the quirkless loser back in his place. He had pushed him, insulted him, and threatened him. But ever since Deku had been adopted by some random guy, he had stopped breaking. He didn't cry anymore. He didn't beg. He just looked at Bakugo like he was a puzzle to be solved, rather than a threat to be feared. I saw you looking at me during math, Bakugo growled, taking a step closer. Small, crackling explosions popped in the palms of his hands, sending the bitter scent of burnt caramel into the air. You taking notes on me, you quirkless freak? Trying to figure out how to be as great as me? I was actually looking out the window, Kaken, Izuku replied calmly. There was a sparrow building a nest in the gutter. The 2 lackeys snickered, thinking Izuku was mocking him. Bakugo's face flushed red with rage. You think you're funny, Deku? You think because you act all tough now, it changes anything? You're still a 0. You're nothing. Bakugo lunged forward, his hand snapping out to grab Izuku's notebook. It happened in a fraction of a second. To the untrained eye, it looked like magic. To Izuku, whose brain had been trained by Mirko's relentless, high-speed assaults, Bakugo was moving in slow motion. Bakugo's weight was entirely on his front foot. His right arm was overextended. He was leading with anger, not technique. Izuku didn't panic. He didn't even drop his pen. He simply leaned his torso back to the left, allowing Bakugo's hand to grasp empty air. As Bakugo stumbled forward from the missed grab, overbalancing, Izuku's right leg lashed out from his seated position in a lightning-fast, perfectly executed sweep. His reinforced sneaker caught Bakugo right behind the ankle. With a yelp of surprise, Bakugo's legs were ripped out from under him. He went entirely airborne for a split second before slamming flat on his back into the dirt with a heavy, breathless thud. The playground went dead silent. The kids playing soccer stopped. The 2 lackeys stared, their jaws hanging open in sheer disbelief. The invincible Katsuki Bakugo was on his back, the wind completely knocked out of him. Izuku hadn't even stood up. He was still sitting under the tree, his notebook resting safely on his lap. Bakugo lay there for a second, his brain failing to process what had just happened. He, the kid with the strongest quirk in school, had just been dropped by the quirkless kid. Without a punch being thrown, without a single explosion going off, a dark, humiliated rage ignited in Bakugo's chest. He scrambled to his feet, his hands sparking furiously, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "You bastard!" Bakugo roared, drawing his fist back for a massive explosion. "I'll kill you, Bakugo!" A teacher's voice cut across the yard. Mr. Hanako, the recess monitor, was jogging over, looking alarmed. "What is going on here?" Bakugo froze, his fist still raised, smoke trailing from his palms. He glared down at Izuku, panting, his teeth bared like a wild animal. He expected Izuku to cower now, to tattle, to play the victim. Izuku stood up slowly, dusting the dirt off his sweatpants. He looked at the teacher, then back at Bakugo. "Nothing, Mr. Hanako," Izuku said smoothly, his voice polite and completely unbothered. "Kaken just tripped over a root. I was just asking if he was okay." The teacher frowned, looking at Bakugo's dirty back, and the smoking hands. "Is that true, Bakugo?" Bakugo's jaw clenched so hard it looked like his teeth might shatter. He stared at Izuku. The green-haired boy wasn't looking at him with pity, or fear, or even arrogance. He was just standing his ground. "Yeah," Bakugo spat, shoving his hands deep into his pockets to hide the trembling of his fingers. "I tripped." "Be careful, then," the teacher sighed, walking away. No roughhousing. As soon as the teacher was out of earshot, the two lackeys nervously took a step back. Bakugo stepped into Izuku's personal space, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper. "Don't you ever do that again, Deku. You hear me? Next time, I blow your head off." Izuku looked right back into Bakugo's furious crimson eyes. He remembered Mirko's words. "If they push you, bite their hand off." "I'm not trying to fight you, Kaken," Izuku said quietly, his tone absolute steel. "I don't care about proving I'm stronger than you. But I am never going to let you hit me again. So if you come at me, I will put you on the ground. Every time." Bakugo stared at him, breath hitching. The sheer, unwavering confidence radiating from the quirkless boy was terrifying. It broke every rule of the world Bakugo understood. "You're dead," Bakugo hissed. He spun on his heel and stormed away, his lackeys scrambling to keep up with him. Izuku watched him go. His heart was pounding frantically against his ribs, and his palms were slick with sweat, but he forced his hands to remain perfectly still. He let out a long, shaky breath, sinking back down against the trunk of the tree. He opened his notebook back up. He turned past the page on Kamui Woods, flipping to a section labeled Katsuki Bakugo, Explosion. Under the section detailing Bakugo's right hook, Izuku took his pen and added a new note in neat, precise handwriting. Overcommits on right-handed strikes when angry. Center of gravity shifts entirely to the front foot. Vulnerable to low sweeps. Retains high danger level up close. Izuku smiled, a small, genuine expression that reached his eyes. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a student. He was a fighter. He was in Usujiyama. By the time Izuku Midoriya turned 14, the whispers at Aldera Junior High had changed. They no longer called him a fragile, quirkless loser. They didn't push him into lockers or try to trip him in the halls. In fact, most of the student body treated him with a wide, cautious berth, as if he were an unexploded piece of ordnance sitting quietly in the back row of classroom 3A. Izuku didn't look intimidating. He was still relatively compact, his dark green curls as messy as ever, his uniform pristine and neatly buttoned. But there was a density to him now. His posture was perfectly aligned, his movements entirely devoid of wasted energy. He walked with a silent, rolling gait that allowed him to pivot or launch himself in any direction at a fraction of a second's notice. The faint, silvery scars peeking out from beneath his collar and cuffs told a story of a boy who spent his free time getting tossed through drywall by the number 5 pro hero. "All right, settle down, Mr. Chiba," the homeroom teacher droned, slapping a thick stack of career aptitude papers against his podium. "You're all third years now. It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I'm supposed to pass out these career forms." The teacher paused, a wry smile cracking his face. He dramatically tossed the stack of papers over his shoulder, letting them flutter to the floor. "But who am I kidding? You all want to go to the hero course. The classroom erupted. Quirks flared to life, students elongating their necks, shooting water from their fingers, or emitting small bursts of light. It was a cacophony of teenage ambition. Hey, teach! Don't lump me in with these background characters. The noise died down instantly as Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, his feet propped arrogantly on his desk. At 14, Bakugo was tall, athletic, and radiated an aggressive, volatile heat. He smirked, small explosions popping like firecrackers in his palms. I'm not heading to some D-list agency. I've aced the mock tests. I'm the only one here going to UA High. Whispers broke out. UA? The national school? The acceptance rate is insanely low. Oh, right, the teacher said, adjusting his glasses and glancing down at his clipboard. Bakugo, you are aiming for UA. But actually, Midoriya is applying for the UA Hero course as well. The classroom froze. Every eye slowly turned toward the back corner, where Izuku sat quietly, finishing a sketch of the Pro Hero backdraft in his notebook. For years ago, this announcement would have sparked a riot of cruel laughter. Today, there was only a tense, heavy silence. Everyone remembered the incidents. They remembered a second-year student with a gigantification quirk trying to extort Izuku for lunch money, only to find himself flat on his back, his arm pinned in a joint lock so agonizing he had surrendered in tears before the teachers even arrived. They remembered Izuku outrunning the track team's star sprinter in gym class, while wearing heavy, steel-toed boots. No one laughed. Bakugo didn't laugh either. He slowly turned his head, his crimson eyes locking onto Izuku. The rivalry between them had mutated into something dark, complex, and deeply frustrating for the explosive teen. Bakugo hated Izuku because Izuku refused to act like prey. You think you can pass the practical, Deku? Bakugo growled, his voice low enough that only the back half of the class heard the threat. Yui doesn't do martial arts tournaments. They do war zones. Izuku calmly clicked his pen shut. He met Bakugo's glare with cool, emerald eyes. I know the curriculum, Kaken, but Haru says the underground entrance exams prioritize adaptability over raw destructive output. I'm prepared. Bakugo's jaw locked. Haru. The underground hero. The man who had taken the sniveling, useless Deku and forged him into a weapon. Bakugo scoffed, turning back to the front of the room, a vein pulsing in his neck. Whatever. Don't die before I get to crush you myself. Izuku offered a polite, infuriatingly serene nod. I'll do my best. Walking home that afternoon, Izuku took the scenic route. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the streets of Musadefu. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations and training regimens. Only 10 months remained until the UA entrance exam. Haru had already ramped up his evening training, shifting from standard capoeira and taekwondo forms into brutal, urban environment survival drills. Last night, Haru had blindfolded Izuku and made him navigate a condemned construction site while throwing ball bearings at him. If you can't see the attack, you have to feel the shift in air pressure, Haru had said, sitting on a steel beam 3 stories up, munching on an apple. Underground heroes work in the dark. Your eyes will lie to you. Your skin won't. Izuku smiled fondly at the memory, absent-mindedly rubbing a faint bruise on his forearm. Haru wasn't a conventional father, but he was everything Izuku needed. And Mirko. Mirko was his boss. She refused to let him call her a mentor, claiming it sounded too old, but she had spent the last 5 years ensuring Izuku's pain tolerance was borderline superhuman. Izuku's path took him through a dark, slightly damp underpass beneath the city's main transit line. He was mentally drafting a new workout schedule when his senses, honed by endless ambushes from his grandmother, screamed at him. The air pressures shifted drastically behind him. A foul stench, like rotting sewage mixed with swamp water, flooded the tunnel. Izuku didn't turn to look. He instantly dropped into a forward roll, his heavy combat boots scraping the concrete. Where his head had been a fraction of a second prior, a massive, gelatinous wave of dark green sludge slammed into the tunnel wall. A medium-sized body. A gurgling, wet voice echoed from the mass of sludge. 2 terrifyingly wide, liquid eyes materialized in the muck, along with a jagged maw of teeth. Perfect. I need a meat suit to hide in. You'll do nicely, kid. The sludge villain lunged, extending thick, whip-like tendrils of mud to ensnare Izuku's limbs. Izuku hit the ground and sprang up like a coiled spring. Fluid-type quirk, his brain analyzed in milliseconds. Physical strikes will be absorbed. Grappling is impossible. Asphyxiation is his primary win condition. I don't think so, Izuku muttered. He dashed toward the wall of the underpass, using his momentum to run 2 steps horizontally up the curved concrete. A sludge tendril smashed into the spot where he had just stood. From his elevated position on the wall, Izuku pushed off, spinning midair. He pinpointed the only solid part of the villain, the eyes. Take this, Izuku shouted. He executed a flawless flying knee strike, putting the entire weight of his descent into the blow, aiming directly for the villain's left eye. Squelch. Ack. The villain roared in agony as Izuku's steel-toed knee buried itself into the vulnerable, gelatinous eyeball. The villain thrashed violently, whipping its fluid body in a blind panic. Izuku rebounded off the strike, landing perfectly on his feet. He had heard it, but as he watched the sludge swirl and reform around the bruised eye, he realized the grim truth of Haru's warnings. A quirkless fighter lacks stopping power. He could evade and sting the villain all day, but he couldn't generate the massive concussive force needed to scatter the fluid. The villain, now furious, swelled in size, blocking both exits of the tunnel. You little brat. I'll drown you slow for that. Izuku dropped his center of gravity, preparing to fight a war of attrition. He just needed to stall. If he caused enough of a commotion, a pro-hero would. A manhole cover at the far end of the tunnel suddenly exploded upward, rattling against the ceiling before clattering to the floor. Have no fear, you are safe. A voice boomed, rich and resonant, echoing with a power that vibrated in Izuku's chest. Now. I am here. Izuku's breath caught. He knew that silhouette. The towering height. The massive, impossible musculature. The twin tufts of blonde hair standing up like victory V's. All Might. The sludge villain shrieked in terror, launching itself forward in a desperate bid to capture Izuku and take a hostage. But All Might was already moving. He crossed the distance of the tunnel in a single bound, pulling his fist back. The sheer kinetic energy gathering around the number 1 hero's arm made the air crackle. Texas smash! The punch didn't even connect with the villain. The wind pressure generated by the strike was so catastrophically powerful that it acted like a localized hurricane. The air tore the sludge villain apart, splattering him against the ceiling, the walls, and the floor. Izuku had to cross his arms and dig his heels into the concrete just to avoid being blown away by the sheer force of the shockwave. When the wind died down, All Might was standing there, laughing heartily, gathering the scattered sludge into 2 large plastic soda bottles he had apparently bought from a convenience store. Izuku stared, completely starstruck. He had spent his entire life analyzing heroes. He lived with 2 of them. But seeing the symbol of peace up close, witnessing the absolute pinnacle of power, it was mesmerizing. Thank you for your assistance, young man. All Might boomed, turning to Izuku and flashing his trademark blinding smile. That was a very brave strike to the eye. Excellent tactical thinking, but it is safe now. All Might. Izuku stammered, the hyper-competent martial artist momentarily vanishing, replaced entirely by the lifelong Fanda. He frantically patted his pockets, pulling out his notebook. Please, sir, could I get an autograph? Of course. All Might laughed, grabbing the notebook and signing it with blinding speed. Now, I must get this villain to the police. Stay safe, citizen. All Might crouched down, his leg muscles bulging, preparing to leap away. Izuku watched him. He had his autograph. He had survived. But as All Might prepared to jump, a burning, desperate question flared in Izuku's chest. It was the question that had defined his entire life. Haru had given him an answer. Mirko had given him an answer. But he needed to hear it from the top of the mountain. He needed to know what the symbol of peace thought of him. Before his rational brain could stop him, Izuku lunged forward, grabbing onto All Might's pant leg right as the hero launched himself into the sky. The wind roared in Izuku's ears, ripping the breath from his lungs. The city turned into a dizzying blur below them. Hey! Hey, let go! Your fanaticism is too much! All Might shouted over the rushing wind, looking down in panic at the teenager clinging to his leg. If I let go, I'll die. Izuku yelled back, his eyes watering from the wind speed, his grip like a vice. All Might sighed heavily. He scanned the area and aimed for a tall, empty office building, landing gracefully on the roof. Izuku let go, stumbling forward a few steps, his knees wobbling slightly. He quickly caught his breath, righting his posture, slipping back into his disciplined mindset. I apologize for my recklessness, All Might. But I had to ask you something. Something important. All Might turned away, his hand gripping his side, smoke beginning to steam off his massive frame. I do not have time, young man. I must be going. Can someone without a quirk be a hero? Izuku shouted, the words tearing out of his throat. He bowed respectfully at the waist. People tell me I can't. They tell me it's impossible. But I've trained every single day. I've broken my bones, I've bled, I've pushed my body past its limits. I want to save people with a smile, just like you. Can a quirkless person stand on the same stage as the symbol of peace? Izuku kept his head bowed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He waited for the booming laugh. He waited for the encouragement. Instead, a wet, hacking cough echoed across the rooftop. Izuku looked up and froze. The towering, invincible god of justice was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man with sunken eyes, a sharp jawline, and clothes that hung off his fragile frame like a scarecrow. Blood trickled from his mouth. What? Izuku whispered, stepping back, instantly dropping into a defensive stance. Where is All Might? Is this an illusion quirk? I assure you, kid. I am All Might, the skeletal man sighed, wiping the blood from his chin. He pulled up his oversized white shirt, revealing a grotesque, spider-webbing scar that covered the entire left side of his chest. I suffered this injury 5 years ago. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. Izuku's brilliant mind connected the dots instantly. 5 years ago. Toxic chainsaw? No, the damage is too immense. A covered-up fight. The symbol of peace is secretly dying. Why are you showing me this? Izuku asked cautiously, keeping his distance. All Might looked at the boy, his sunken blue eyes heavy with exhaustion and sorrow. Because you need to understand the reality of this job. Pros are always risking their lives. Some villains can't be beaten with just martial arts and determination. You asked if you can be a hero without a quirk? All Might paused. The wind blew across the desolate roof. I cannot, in good conscience, say yes, All Might said gently. It is not a bad dream to have. But you must be realistic. Without power, you will become a liability. If you want to help people, become a police officer. They get a lot of flack, but it's a fine, honorable profession. I'm sorry, kid. But no. You cannot be a hero. All Might opened the door to the stairwell, leaving Izuku standing alone on the roof. Izuku didn't move for a long time. The rejection hung heavily in the air. If this had happened when he was 5, Izuku would have shattered. He would have collapsed into a puddle of tears, his lifelong dream finally, utterly crushed by the man he idolized most. But Izuku was 14. He had been raised by Haruyu Sugiyama, a man who survived the shadows by being stubborn, and Rumi Usujiyama, a woman who treated the word impossible as a personal insult. Izuku took a deep breath. He didn't cry. His eyes were dry. He clenched his fists at his sides, feeling the rough calluses on his knuckles, the strength in his legs. I respect your opinion, All Might, Izuku whispered to the empty air. He bowed one final time toward the stairwell door. But my dad and my boss think otherwise. I'll prove you wrong. Izuku turned and began his descent down the building. He felt a sting of disappointment, yes. But it wasn't despair. It was fuel. By the time Izuku reached the street level, a loud, booming explosion rocked the shopping district 2 blocks over. Black smoke billowed into the evening sky. Izuku's instincts flared. Explosions. That sounds like Kaken. He sprinted toward the smoke, his heavy boots pounding the pavement. He pushed his way through a massive crowd of onlookers that had gathered at the edge of the shopping arcade. What he saw made his blood run cold. The sludge villain from the tunnel was back. He had somehow escaped All Might's bottles. And he had taken a hostage. Trapped within the swirling, suffocating mass of dark fluid was Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo was thrashing violently, firing off massive, panicked explosions that were setting the surrounding buildings on fire, completely unable to gain leverage. Izuku looked around desperately. The pro-heroes were there. Death Arms was trying to pull the sludge apart, but lacked the grip. Kamui Woods couldn't get close because of the fire. Empty Lady didn't have room to expand in the narrow two-lane street. Backdraft was busy putting out the fires. They were just standing there. It's no use. Death Arms yelled, coughing on the smoke. We can't grab him. We have to wait for someone with a suitable quirk. Izuku stared at the pros in absolute horror and disgust. Wait, Haru's voice echoed in his head. Pros get complacent. They rely too heavily on their quirks. If a situation doesn't match their power, they freeze. Mirko's voice followed, roaring with feral intensity. If you're not going to fight with everything you have, get the hell out of the way. Izuku looked back at the villain. The sludge shifted, and for a split second, Izuku saw Bakugo's eyes. They weren't arrogant. They weren't angry, they were terrified. Bakugo was drowning. Izuku didn't think. His body, conditioned by 5 years of relentless, brutal, life-or-death training, moved on its own. He didn't just run into the street. That was suicide. The ground was covered in flaming debris and slick muck. Instead, Izuku sprinted toward a nearby overturned sedan. Hey! Kid, get back here! It's not safe! Death Arms bellowed, reaching out to grab him. Izuku ducked under the pro-hero's massive arm, fluid and untouchable. He hit the hood of the sedan, using his momentum to vault onto the roof of a crushed bus stop. From there, he was airborne. He moved like a phantom, bouncing from a sturdy street lamp to the brick facade of a burning building, utilizing his parkour to gain elevation and angle. The crowd gasped. The pros watched in stunned disbelief as a teenager in a middle school uniform scaled the battleground with the agility of a seasoned underground hero. You again? The sludge villain roared, looking up at the boy bounding off the walls. I'll crush you! The villain whipped 3 massive tendrils of sludge toward Izuku midair. Izuku's eyes narrowed. His breathing slowed. He saw the trajectory. Using the principles of capoeira, he tucked his knees into his chest and spun, threading the needle perfectly between the cracking tendrils. He didn't lose an ounce of momentum. He descended toward the villain from a 45-degree angle, gravity and speed multiplying his physical force. He needed to create an opening for Bakugo to breathe. He needed maximum, concentrated impact. Izuku remembered the heavy bag in the backyard. He remembered Mirko laughing at him, telling him to hit harder, to hit like he meant to break the world in half. Izuku extended his right leg, locking his knee, turning his entire body into a descending missile. He aimed for the exact same eye he had bruised in the tunnel. Let him go! Izuku roared. The strike connected. It wasn't a pathetic, flailing punch. It was a perfectly executed, terminal velocity heel kick delivered by a boy who spent every waking hour hardening his bones against concrete. The impact sounded like a gunshot echoing through the shopping district. Izuku's steel-toed boot buried itself so deeply into the sludge villain's eyeball that the fluid surrounding it violently displaced. The sheer kinetic shockwave rippled through the villain's liquid body, causing the sludge to momentarily lose its cohesive surface tension. The villain shrieked, a horrifying, bubbling wail of absolute agony. His hold on Bakugo slackened instantly as the pain shocked his nervous system. Izuku didn't admire his work. The moment his boot made contact, he used the villain's face as a springboard, kicking off and wrapping his arm around Bakugo's collar. Using his descent momentum, Izuku ripped Bakugo free from the loosening sludge, dragging the explosive teen backward out of the muck. They hit the pavement together, sliding across the asphalt. Izuku instantly rolled, pulling Bakugo behind his body, placing himself firmly between the coughing teen and the recovering villain. Izuku dropped into a low martial arts stance, his fists raised, breathing heavy but perfectly steady. The crowd was dead silent. Standing in the back of the crowd, gripping a light pole so hard his bony fingers were cracking the metal, was Toshinori Yagi, All Might. The skeletal hero stared at the green-haired boy in sheer, unadulterated awe. Toshinori had stood there, watching the villain he had failed to contain suffocate a child. He had told himself he couldn't act. His time was up. He was powerless. He had let his fear and his limits paralyze him. But this boy, this quirkless, powerless boy who Tashinori had personally rejected less than 20 minutes ago, had moved. When the top-tier pro-heroes had stood around making excuses, waiting for someone else to fix the problem, a quirkless child had thrown himself into the fire, using nothing but his own 2 hands, his trained body, and an utterly unbreakable spirit to save a life. He is more of a hero than any of us, Tashinori thought, a profound, agonizing shame washing over him, followed immediately by a surging, white-hot blaze of inspiration. The sludge villain recovered, his remaining eye wide with homicidal fury. "I'll kill you both! I'll tear you to pieces!" The villain surged forward like a tidal wave. Izuku braced himself, fully prepared to fight to the death to protect the boy behind him. But he didn't have to. "I really am pathetic," a booming, thunderous voice echoed, stepping directly in front of Izuku and Bakugo. Izuku's eyes widened. All Might stood there, fully muscled, steam rolling off his gargantuan shoulders in thick waves. Blood was leaking from the corner of his brilliant smile, but his presence was absolute. He grabbed the wrists of the sludge villain's tendrils, his muscles bulging as he dug his feet into the cracked pavement. "I told you what makes a hero, young man," All Might said, looking over his shoulder at Izuku, his blue eyes burning with profound respect. "Yet I was not living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives." All Might reeled his right arm back. The air pressure dropped violently. The world seemed to hold its breath. Detroit. Smash! The punch was devastating. The localized air pressure created a devastating tornado, obliterating the sludge villain entirely, scattering the fluid into thousands of harmless droplets across the street. The sheer force of the updraft pierced the sky, colliding with the clouds above, forcing them to condense. A moment later, it began to rain. All Might stood victorious in the downpour. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers. The aftermath was chaotic. The police arrived to scrape up the villain. Bakugo was surrounded by pro-heroes, being praised for his incredible quirk, his resistance, and his potential. Izuku was surrounded by pro-heroes too. But they weren't praising him. "What were you thinking, kid?" Kamui Wood scolded, crossing his wooden arms. "That was incredibly reckless. You could have been killed. There was absolutely no reason for you to endanger yourself." Death Arms agreed, towering over Izuku. "You're a civilian. You don't have a license to fight, and you don't even have a quirk to protect yourself. You made our jobs harder." Izuku stood calmly in the rain. He looked at the pro-heroes. He thought about how they had stood on the sidelines while Kaken was dying. He thought about how Haru would handle this. Izuku didn't cower. He politely, deeply bowed to the heroes. "I apologize if I disrupted your perimeter, pro-heroes," Izuku said, his voice carrying clearly over the rain, perfectly polite but laced with a razor-sharp, underlying edge. However, according to the Good Samaritan Heroic Exemption Clause, Section 4, a civilian is permitted to intervene physically if a life is in immediate, undeniable jeopardy, and licensed pro-heroes are fundamentally incapable of executing a rescue within the required time frame. Death Arms froze, his jaw dropping slightly. Kamui Woods blinked in stunned silence. A 14-year-old kid had just casually cited obscure legal hero litigation law. Izuku straightened up, his emerald eyes locking onto Death Arms. "With all due respect, sir. I didn't see anyone moving. I saw a boy suffocating. I neutralized the immediate threat and extracted the hostage without utilizing an illegal quirk discharge. If you wish to file a grievance, my guardian is the underground hero, Leapfrog. You can take it up with him." The pro-heroes were utterly speechless. The kid hadn't just saved the day. He had completely dismantled their authority with cold, analytical precision. From a few feet away, Bakugo watched the entire exchange. The pro-heroes were telling Bakugo how great he was, but Bakugo wasn't listening. He was staring at Izuku. The quirkless loser who had just stared down a villain, saved his life, and politely told 3 pro-heroes to go to hell. Bakugo shoved the medics away and stomped over to Izuku. "Deku," Bakugo growled, his voice rough from the smoke. Izuku turned, his stance neutral, ready for an attack. Bakugo's fists were clenched at his sides, trembling slightly. His pride was shattered. He had been weak, and Deku had been strong. But unlike the playground all those years ago, Bakugo couldn't lie to himself. He knew what had just happened. I didn't need your help, Bakugo spat, his voice laced with complex, agonizing frustration. I would have figured it out. I'm going to be the #1 hero, and I don't need a quirkless extra stepping in to save me. Don't you ever think I owe you, Deku? You hear me? Izuku looked at the explosive teen. He saw the wounded pride, the fierce determination. I don't think you owe me anything, Kaken, Izuku said quietly. I just moved. Bakugo glared at him for one long, silent second before spinning around and marching off into the rain. Izuku sighed, picking up his charred yellow backpack from the street. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving his muscles aching and his right heel throbbing from the impact of the kick. He slipped away from the crowd, taking the long way home through the quiet, rain-slicked suburban streets. He felt exhausted, but strange peace settled over him. All Might had said no. The system said no, but Izuku knew the truth now. He had felt it when his boot connected with the villain. He could do this. I am here! Izuku jumped, spinning around. All Might suddenly dashed out from an alleyway, skidding to a halt in front of Izuku. The massive hero instantly deflated, a plume of steam bursting out as Toshinori Yagi stood coughing, wiping blood from his mouth. All Might? Izuku gasped. What are you doing here? Did you follow me? Toshinori stepped forward, his posture no longer slumped, but straightened with a profound, solemn dignity. He looked at Izuku, his blue eyes shining with unshed tears in the rain. I came to thank you. And to apologize, Toshinori said softly. If I had not been there to hear your story, if I had not seen what you did today, I would have made the greatest mistake of my life. Izuku stared, speechless. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days, Toshinori continued, placing a hand over his heart. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku's breath hitched. Tears, the first tears he had shed in years, pricked the corners of his eyes. That was true for you today, wasn't it? Toshinori asked. Izuku slowly fell to his knees on the wet pavement. He clutched his chest, the weight of the last 9 years of struggle, pain, and relentless training crashing over him. He nodded. Toshinori stepped forward, looking down at the kneeling, trembling boy. He saw the scars on his arms. He saw the calluses on his hands. He saw a vessel that had been forged in the shadows, waiting for a light to fill it. You told me that your family believed you could be a hero, Toshinori said, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. They were right. You have the heart, the spirit, and the discipline. Young man, I deem you worthy. Toshinori pointed directly at Izuku. You can become a hero. Izuku bowed his head, crying silent, happy tears into the asphalt. The words he had waited his entire life to hear. And Toshinori added, a warm smile spreading across his gaunt face. I believe you are worthy to inherit my power. Izuku's head snapped up, his tears momentarily stalling in sheer confusion. Inherit your power? Yes, Toshinori grinned. How would you feel about receiving the quirk of the symbol of peace? Izuku blinked. He thought about his intense martial arts training. He thought about Haru's lectures on kinetic energy. He thought about Mirko's terrifying leg strength. He imagined adding the physical power of All Might to that arsenal. Izuku wiped his eyes, a small, dangerous smile creeping onto his face. I think, Izuku said, standing up to meet All Might's gaze. My dad is going to have a lot of questions for you. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets of Muzurifu glistening under the glow of the amber streetlights. The air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and ozone. Izuku Midoriya stood on the sidewalk, his charred yellow backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder, staring at the skeletal man in front of him. How would you feel about receiving the quirk of the symbol of peace? The words hung in the damp air, echoing in Izuku's mind like the ringing of a massive bell. He had spent his entire life studying quirks. He knew the biological laws that governed them. Quirks were genetic lotteries, physical appendages, and biological functions tied to human evolution. They were not items to be passed around like trading cards. And yet, standing before him was Toshinori Yagi, the man who held the sky on his shoulders, telling him the impossible was not only real, but that it was being offered to him. A quirkless kid who had spent the last 9 years learning how to break bones because he had no power of his own. Inherit, Izuku repeated, his brilliant, hyperactive brain kicking into absolute overdrive. He began to pace back and forth, his hands flying up to his face as the muttering started. A transferable quirk. Is that even scientifically viable? There are documented cases of quirk mutations and cellular manipulation, but a voluntary transfer of a quirk factor would require a complete overwrite of the recipient's DNA sequence. How does the body not reject it? Is it a symbiotic enhancement, or a parasitic energy core? If the power has been passed down, does it stockpile? Wait, if it stockpiles kinetic energy and base physical strength, the sheer torque applied to a human skeleton without a natural resistance mutation would be catastrophic. Whoa, young man! Stop! Toshinori waved his bony hands, utterly bewildered by the sudden storm of high-level quirk theory pouring out of the 14-year-old's mouth. You're overthinking it. Just breathe. Izuku snapped his mouth shut, his cheeks flushing red. He bowed quickly. I'm sorry, All Might. It's just, it breaks every law of quirk biology. It does. Toshinori smiled softly, the skeletal man looking up at the clearing night sky. The quirk is called One for All. It is a sacred torch, passed from one generation to the next. The first user cultivated it. The next refined it. And so on, until it was given to me. It is the crystallization of power, meant to strike down the ultimate evil. Toshinori turned back to Izuku, his sunken blue eyes piercing the gloom. I have been searching for a successor for a long time. Someone who embodies the true essence of heroism. Moving before thinking, risking oneself for another. You prove today that you possess a hero's spirit, Izuku Midoriya. Will you accept this power? Izuku didn't need to think about his answer. He had wanted this his entire life. He wanted to be a hero who saved people with a smile. But as he looked at Toshinori, he didn't just see All Might. He saw the years of blood, sweat, and agonizing pain he had endured. He saw Haru wrapping his bruised knuckles. He saw Mirko throwing him across the backyard, teaching him how to survive. He was no longer a desperate, lonely boy begging for a crumb of power. He was a martial artist. He was a survivor. Izuku straightened his posture, his emerald eyes locking onto Toshinori's with a profound, unwavering intensity. I accept, Izuku said, his voice completely steady. I will take your power, All Might. And I will make it my own. Toshinori's face broke into a wide, brilliant smile, a shadow of the symbol of peace shining through his fragile frame. Excellent! No hesitation. Then, starting tomorrow, we will. But, Izuku interrupted, raising a single finger. There is a condition. Toshinori blinked. A condition? No one had ever given the number one hero a condition before. I have to tell my dad, Izuku said firmly. He's the one who raised me. He's the one who taught me how to fight, how to survive, and how to analyze the world. In the Usajiyama household, we don't keep secrets about things that can get us killed. If I'm taking on a quirk that could drastically alter my physiology, Haru has to know. Toshinori rubbed the back of his neck, looking incredibly nervous. Ah. Young Midoriya, One for All is a closely guarded secret. If the world knew it could be transferred, villains would tear the country apart trying to steal it. The fewer people who know, the safer you are. My dad is the underground hero, Leapfrog, Izuku countered smoothly. He's kept the secrets of cartel bosses, corrupt politicians, and black market quirk brokers. He doesn't leak, and more importantly, if I start manifesting a strength enhancement quirk out of nowhere, he's going to notice immediately. You can't hide a broken bone from the man who taught you how to walk off a sprained ankle. Toshinori sighed, recognizing the absolute, stubborn iron in the boy's voice. It was the exact same stubbornness he had shown against the sludge villain. Very well, Toshinori conceded. Lead the way, young man. 30 minutes later, Izuku unlocked the door to apartment 304. The apartment smelled, as it usually did on a Tuesday night, of strong black coffee, gun oil, and whatever heavily spiced takeout Haru had managed to pick up on his patrol route. Haru was sitting at the kitchen table, wearing a dark gray tank top and loose sweatpants, meticulously dismantling and cleaning one of his reinforced grappling hooks. His crimson eyes flicked up as the door opened. "You're late," Haru stated, his voice carrying that low, gravelly tone of an overprotective parent masking his worry with authority. He didn't look up from his gear. "I saw the news alerts about the sludge villain downtown. Assuming you were there, considering your uniform smells like burnt asphalt and sewer water." "I was," Izuku said, taking off his red shoes at the entryway. "I got involved, I figured." Haru sighed, finally looking up. "You got all your limbs? You didn't try to block a solid strike with your forearms again, did you?" "I'm fine, Haru." "But…" "I brought a guest." Haru's eyes narrowed. He paused his cleaning, his entire body suddenly radiating the subtle, coiled tension of an apex predator. His gaze shifted to the doorway, landing on the impossibly tall, skeletal, sickly-looking blond man standing awkwardly in the hall. Haru stood up slowly. His eyes scanned Toshinori from head to toe, analyzing his weight distribution, the way his clothes hung off his frame, and the hidden, dense muscle memory coiled beneath the emaciated exterior. "And who are you?" Haru asked, his voice dropping into the dangerous, quiet register he reserved for interrogations in dark alleys. "You don't look like one of his classmates. You look like you just walked out of a morgue." Toshinori coughed into his hand, intimidated despite himself. "Ah. Good evening, Leapfrog. I assure you, my appearance is a recent development. But I am here to speak with you about Izuku's future." Toshinori took a deep breath. He squeezed his eyes shut, flexed every muscle in his withered body, and summoned the power. Poof! A cloud of steam erupted in the cramped entryway of the apartment. When it cleared, the skeletal man was gone. In his place stood the gargantuan, 7-foot-tall, impossibly muscular symbol of peace, his head nearly scraping the ceiling of the hallway. "I am here!" All Might boomed, flashing his trademark smile, trying to project absolute confidence. "To discuss your son!" Silence fell over the kitchen. Izuku winced, waiting for the awe, the shock, or the reverence. Haru stared at the number one hero. He looked at All Might's massive, bulging biceps. He looked at the V-shaped hair. He looked at the blinding smile. Then, Haru slowly reached down to the kitchen table, picked up a heavy, steel wrench, and pointed it directly at All Might's face. "If you break my ceiling," Haru said, his voice deadly calm, "I will snap your kneecaps backward." All Might deflated instantly, coughing up a small spray of blood as he reverted back to his skeletal form, clutching his chest. "I apologize. I just wanted to prove my identity. I know who you are, Yagi." Haru grunted, tossing the wrench back onto the table. "You think an underground hero doesn't know the real face of the guy taking up 80% of the daylight budget? Sit down before you pass out. You look terrible." Toshinori blinked in shock. He slowly shuffled over to the kitchen table and sat down, entirely thrown off balance. Most people fell to their knees or screamed when he revealed his secret. This man had threatened his joints. Izuku quickly moved to the kitchen counter, grabbing 3 mugs and pouring hot tea. He set them down and took the seat next to Haru, facing the number one hero. "All right," Haru said, leaning back in his chair, crossing his muscular arms over his chest. His crimson eyes were entirely devoid of warmth. "Izuku told me he was jumping in front of a villain today." The news said Bakugo was the hostage. "Given that Izuku is currently alive and not a smear on the pavement, I'm guessing you stepped in eventually. So, why are you sitting in my kitchen?" Toshinori took a sip of the tea, finding it surprisingly excellent. He set the mug down, his expression turning solemn. "Your son," Toshinori began, looking Haru dead in the eye, "is a true hero. Today, while licensed professionals stood paralyzed by fear and circumstance, Izuku moved. He risked his life without a second thought. He possesses the heart of a champion." Haru didn't smile. He didn't puff his chest with pride. His jaw tightened. "He's 14. He shouldn't have had to move. The pros should have done their damn jobs." "I agree." Toshinori nodded, his voice heavy with shame. "I was one of those paralyzed heroes. My time limit had expired. I told myself I couldn't fight. But seeing your son, it reminded me of what it truly means to be a hero. He inspired me to push past my limits. Haru's eyes softened just a fraction, looking sideways at Izuku, who was staring intently at his tea. Haru reached out and ruffled Izuku's green curls, a silent gesture of profound pride. He's got a habit of doing that, Haru muttered. Then, he looked back at Tashinori. Get to the point, All Might. You didn't come here just to sing his praises. What do you want? I want to make him my successor, Tashinori said plainly. My quirk, one for all, can be passed down. I am dying leapfrog. My time as the symbol of peace is ending. I want Izuku to inherit my power. Haru froze. The air in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. Izuku tensed, knowing exactly how his father's mind worked. Haru didn't see gifts. He saw traps. Passed down, Haru repeated softly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, the protective father instantly overriding the pro-hero. Let's get something straight, Yagi. Quirks aren't magic, they are biology. You give a quirkless kid a localized, stockpiled strength enhancer, what happens to his body? Tashinori hesitated. Well, if his vessel is not properly prepared, the sheer influx of power could blow his limbs off. The silence that followed was deafening. Haru's eyes flared a vibrant, terrifying crimson. He slammed his hand onto the kitchen table so hard the wood cracked down the center, the tea mugs rattling violently. You're offering my son a bomb? Haru roared, standing up, his chair scraping violently against the linoleum. You want to shove an unstable, unquantifiable amount of kinetic energy into a 14-year-old kid's DNA, knowing it could tear his arms off? Haru, wait! Izuku pleaded, standing up and grabbing his father's arm. He's not giving it to me right now. We're going to train. I'm going to prepare my body. You've been preparing your body for 5 years, Izuku. Haru snapped, his voice tight with raw fear. He pointed a scarred finger at Tashinori. And what about the target? If you give him your quirk, who comes looking for him? Does the underworld know about this power? Does the guy who put that hole in your chest know? Tashinori looked away, unable to meet Haru's blazing eyes. He might. Unbelievable. Haru scoffed, running a hand through his dark hair, pacing the small kitchen. You daylight heroes are all the same. You see a kid with a good heart, and you decide to turn him into a martyr for your crusade. He's a kid, Yagi. Not a weapon. I know he is a kid. Tashinori fired back, standing up, his skeletal frame suddenly radiating an incredible, suffocating aura of command. And I know the burden I am asking him to carry. But look at him, leapfrog. Look at your son. Do you honestly believe he will stop throwing himself into danger? Do you believe he will ever stop trying to save people? He is going to be a hero, with or without my power. I am simply offering him the means to survive the path he has already chosen. Haru stopped pacing. He looked at Izuku. Izuku was standing perfectly straight, his fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't crying. He wasn't scared. He looked exactly like the boy who had stared down Mirko 5 years ago, refusing to break. Haru, Izuku said, his voice quiet but absolute. You taught me how to fight dirty because I had a disadvantage. You gave me the tools to survive. Please, let me take this tool, too. Let me use it to protect people. Haru stared at his son for a long, agonizing minute. He saw the scars. He knew the pain Izuku had already endured. He knew Tashinori was right. Izuku would throw himself at a villain with nothing but a pocket knife if it meant saving someone. At least with one for all, he would have a shield. Before Haru could answer, a loud, metallic crash echoed from the balcony's sliding glass door. The glass shattered into a million pieces as a muscular, white-haired blur tore through the living room curtains. Mirko landed in a perfect crouch on the shattered glass, completely ignoring the fact that she had just destroyed a third-story window. She was in her hero costume, breathing heavily, a wild, feral grin plastered across her face. I heard my favorite pup made the news! Mirko bellowed, standing up and dusting glass off her shoulders. Drop-kicking a sludge monster? That's my boy. She stopped mid-sentence, her ruby-red eyes landing on the skeletal man standing in the kitchen. Mirko's rabbit ears twitched. She sniffed the air, her predatory senses locking onto the faint, overwhelming aura of power hidden beneath the sickly exterior. Her eyes widened in recognition. Well, I'll be damned. Mirko barked a laugh, sauntering into the kitchen, her heavy thigh-high boots crunching on the glass. Tashinori Yagi in my idiot son's apartment. You look like hell, old man, Mirko. Tashinori greeted, offering a weary, polite bow. It is good to see you. Don't give me that formal crap. Mirko snorted, slapping Tashinori on his bony back hard enough to make him wheeze. She looked at Haru, then at Izuku, and then back at All Might. What's the number one hero doing sitting at a crack table with my pupil? He wants to give Izuku his quirk. Haru said flatly, rubbing his temples, already anticipating the chaos. It's transferable. It's a stockpiling strength enhancer. If Izuku's body can't handle it, his limbs will explode. Mirko blinked. She looked at Izuku. Then she looked at All Might. For 3 seconds there was absolute silence. Then, Mirko threw her head back and let out a booming, psychotic roar of laughter that rattled the remaining windows in the apartment. A strength enhancer? Mirko howled, slapping her thighs. She pointed at Izuku, her eyes practically glowing with sadistic glee. You're giving him a strength enhancer? Oh, you poor bastards! The villains in this country are absolutely screwed. Mother, be serious for 1 minute. Haru groaned. The biological toll. To hell with the biological toll. Mirko interrupted, marching over to Izuku and grabbing him by the shoulders, shaking him violently. Do you realize what you've built here, Yagi? Haru and I have spent 5 years turning this kid's skeleton into reinforced concrete. We've taught him how to utilize centrifugal force, momentum, and kinetic chaining, and now you're going to give him the raw horsepower of a freight train? She spun around, pointing a muscular finger right in All Might's face. You think his limbs are going to explode? Please! I drop-kicked this kid off a 2-story building last week to teach him how to tuck and roll. His pain tolerance is higher than Endeavor's ego. Mirko grinned savagely. Give him the quirk. I want to see how hard he can kick. Tashinori stared at the chaotic, terrifying energy of the number 5 hero. He looked at the exhausted, hyper-competent underground hero, and he looked at the polite, brilliant, deeply analytical green-haired boy standing between them. Tashinori suddenly felt a profound surge of pity for any villain who would ever cross paths with Izuku Midoriya. Haru let out a long, defeated sigh. He looked at Izuku. Are you sure about this, Izuku? Haru asked softly. Once you cross this line, there's no going back. The target on your back becomes permanent. I'm sure, Haru, Izuku said, bowing deeply. I won't let you down. Haru walked over and pulled Izuku into a tight hug. You never could, kid. Haru pulled back and shot a venomous glare at All Might. If he dies, Yagi, I'm digging you up and killing you again. Understood? Tashinori swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. Understood perfectly. The next morning, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting a pale, pinkish glow over the sprawling nightmare that was Dagoba Beach. Over the years, the ocean currents had turned the cove into an illegal dumping ground. Mountains of rusted refrigerators, crushed cars, blown-out tires, and jagged scrap metal covered the sand, effectively choking the life out of the shoreline. Tashinori stood at the top of the concrete stairs, bundled in an oversized trench coat to hide his skeletal frame from the morning chill. He held a clipboard in his hands, heavily annotated with a 10-month workout regimen he had spent all night designing. The physical vessel must be forged. Tashinori called out to Izuku, who was standing at the base of the stairs, wearing his standard gray sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt. One for all is the culmination of raw, unadulterated power. If you try to hold it in an unprepared body, it will break you. So, your trial for the next 10 months, leading up to the UA exam, is to clean this entire beach. Tashinori smiled, expecting the boy to gape in horror at the impossible task. Most teenagers would cry at the sheer volume of trash. Izuku didn't cry. He just tilted his head, his emerald eyes scanning the towering piles of metal. 10 months? Izuku muttered, tapping his chin. That seems a bit generous. Tashinori blinked. Generous? Young Midoriya, there are thousands of tons of scrap here. It will take every ounce of your strength, every waking hour. All Might. Izuku interrupted politely. He reached down, grabbed the hem of his long-sleeved shirt, and pulled it over his head, tossing it onto the concrete steps. Tashinori's jaw dropped. The clipboard slipped from his bony fingers, clattering onto the stairs. Izuku wasn't a bodybuilder. He didn't have the massive, ballooning muscles of a heavyweight lifter. But what Tashinori saw was arguably more terrifying. Izuku's torso was a masterclass in hypercondensed, functional muscle. His core was shredded, the abdominal muscles deeply defined and thick like armor plating, built to absorb massive impacts. His obliques and lats flared like a swimmer's, coiled with terrifying tension. His shoulders and arms were roped with lean, whipcord muscle, mapped with the faint, silvery scars of Mirko's relentless sparring sessions. He didn't look like a 14-year-old kid. He looked like an Olympic gymnast crossed with an underground cage fighter. You already have a vessel," Tashinori whispered in sheer shock. "Your core strength it's flawless." Izuku rolled his shoulders, stretching his neck until it popped. "Haru has had me carrying heavy bags up 5 flights of stairs since I was 8. And Mirko makes me do handstand push-ups while she sits on my feet. My base strength is fine. The issue isn't lifting the trash, all might. It's efficiency." Izuku walked over to a rusted, waterlogged refrigerator half buried in the sand. He didn't approach it like a weightlifter trying to deadlift. He approached it like a martial artist. He analyzed the center of gravity. He dug his right foot into the sand, creating a solid anchor. He placed his hands on the rusted edges, dropped his hips low, and exhaled sharply. Using the perfect kinetic chaining he had learned from capoeira, Izuku didn't just lift the fridge with his arms, he pushed the earth away with his legs, channeling the power up through his core, and into his shoulders. With a sickening crunch of shifting sand, the 500-pound refrigerator broke free. Izuku hoisted it up, resting it diagonally across his back and shoulders, finding the perfect balance point so the weight wouldn't snap his spine. He looked up at the stunned symbol of peace. "Where do you want this?" Izuku asked, not even breathing heavily. Tashinori stared blankly for a second before pointing a trembling finger toward the street level. The truck. By the curb. And so, the training began. But it wasn't the agonizing, soul-crushing struggle Tashinori had anticipated. It was a masterclass in kinetic efficiency. Izuku didn't just carry trash. He used the beach as a parkour course. He leaped over rusted cars with tires strapped to his back. He practiced his taekwondo kicks by shattering massive, rotted wooden beams into kindling to make them easier to carry. He used capoeira sweeps to clear away the smaller debris in massive, fluid arcs. Montage, the 5 months. Month 1, Tashinori threw away his clipboard. His American-style bodybuilding routine was completely useless here. Instead, he focused on teaching Izuku how to breathe. "One for all requires oxygen to combust properly within the cells," Tashinori advised. Izuku incorporated the breathing techniques into his martial arts katas, moving faster, carrying heavier loads. Month 2, Haru started showing up at the beach before dawn, bringing hot black coffee for Tashinori and a protein shake for Izuku. Haru watched critically as Izuku hauled a rusted pickup truck out of the sand using a rope harness. "Your posture is slipping, Izuku. Don't lean into the harness. Keep your spine straight. Let your quads do the work," Haru yelled from the stairs. Tashinori and Haru formed a strange, mutual respect, the daylight god and the underground phantom, united in their awe of the boy's relentless drive. Month 3, Mirko visited. It was chaos. She told Izuku he was moving too slowly. To speed him up, she started throwing heavy, jagged pieces of scrap metal at him while he was carrying a washing machine. Izuku had to dodge, weave, and parry the incoming projectiles without dropping his load. Tashinori nearly had a heart attack. Haru just filmed it on his phone. Izuku's reflexes, already sharp, sharpened into borderline precognition. Month 4, the beach was 90% clear. Izuku was moving with a terrifying, absolute fluidity. The heavy lifting had forced his muscles to adapt, thickening his joints and fortifying his bones. His legs, already his primary weapons, were now trunks of coiled steel. He could stand on the beach, execute a backflip, and launch a truck tire 30 feet into the air with the tip of his boot. Month 5, the horizon broke. Tashinori Yagi stood at the top of the concrete stairs, the cool morning breeze blowing through his oversized coat. He looked out over Dagoba Beach. The mountains of rusted metal, the rotting appliances, the twisted cars, they were all gone. Not a single scrap remained. The golden sand stretched endlessly toward the sparkling, blue ocean, pristine and untouched. Standing at the edge of the water, facing the rising sun, was Izuku Midoriya. He was shirtless, his back to Tashinori. Sweat glistened on his scarred, hyper-defined muscles. He let out a long, slow breath, dropping his martial arts stance, and turned around. The boy who had cried in the alleyway was gone. In his place stood a warrior, forged by 3 different legends, ready for war. Tashinori felt tears well up in his sunken eyes. He walked down the steps, his chest swelling with profound emotion. "You finished it," Tashinori said, his voice breaking. 5 months early. It's a miracle." "It wasn't a miracle, All Might." Izuku smiled softly, wiping sweat from his brow. "It was just physics and stubbornness." Tashinori laughed, a wet, joyful sound. He transformed, a cloud of steam enveloping him, before the gargantuan All Might stood on the beach, his smile rivaling the rising sun. "You have proven yourself, young Midoriya!" All Might boomed, reaching up and grabbing a single, golden strand of his hair, plucking it from his head. "Your vessel is flawless! You have the heart, the will, and the body. Now, it is time to inherit the power." All Might held the strand of hair out to Izuku, his expression completely solemn and heroic. "Eat this." Izuku blinked. The wind howled softly off the ocean. "Excuse me?" Izuku asked, his analytical brain completely flatlining. "To inherit the quirk, you must ingest some of my DNA." All Might explained cheerfully. "It doesn't have to be hair, but it's the easiest. Chew it up and swallow." Izuku stared at the golden hair. He thought about the complex biochemical engineering required for a DNA override. He thought about the sacred torch of power. Then he suppressed a profound urge to gag. "Right," Izuku muttered, taking the hair. "For heroism." He closed his eyes, tossed the hair into his mouth, and swallowed dry. It scratched the entire way down. "Perfect!" Tashinori beamed, reverting back to his skeletal form. "It will take a few hours for the quirk factor to digest and map itself to your nervous system. By the time the UA entrance exam begins this afternoon, you should feel the spark." Izuku nodded, placing a hand over his stomach. He felt completely normal. But deep, deep down, somewhere near his core, he felt a faint, impossibly hot ember ignite. Later that afternoon, the Isujiyama apartment. Izuku stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hallway, adjusting the collar of his black middle school uniform. His stomach was twisting into knots, a combination of nerves for the exam and the strange, bubbling heat of one for all slowly integrating into his bloodstream. He took a deep breath. This was it. The culmination of 10 years of pain, rejection, and sweat. Izuku turned. Haru was standing in the doorway of the living room, dressed in his civilian clothes, holding a large, rectangular cardboard box. Haru's expression was unreadable, a mixture of intense pride, lingering fear, and profound love. He walked over to Izuku and set the box on the small entryway table. "You're wearing your red running shoes," Haru noted, gesturing to Izuku's feet. "They're comfortable," Izuku replied, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "And they have shock absorption for my landings. They're fine for a kid doing parkour on the weekends," Haru said softly, his crimson eyes locking onto Izuku's. "But you're not a kid anymore. And you're not just jumping across rooftops. You're stepping into a war zone today. And you're carrying a bomb in your chest." Haru reached out and popped the lid off the cardboard box. Izuku gasped. Resting inside, nestled in protective foam, was a pair of custom-made, high-top combat boots. They were a dark, deep forest green, accented with matte black armor plating. The soles were thick, grooved rubber, designed for absolute traction on any surface. But the most striking feature was the toe caps and the shin guards. They were reinforced with a dark, brushed tungsten steel alloy. They weren't shoes. They were weapons. "I had a support gear company in the underground make them," Haru explained, rubbing the back of his neck, suddenly looking very awkward. "They're heavily insulated. The shock absorption is built into the sole using a kinetic dispersal mesh, similar to my own hero gear. If you strike something hard, the boots will take the brunt of the kinetic blow, protecting your ankle and knee joints." Haru stepped closer, placing a heavy, warm hand on Izuku's shoulder. You have All Might's power now, Izuku, Haru said, his voice deadly serious. I don't know how it's going to manifest. If he gives you a strength enhancement, do not throw a punch. He has the mass of a truck, you have the mass of a bullet. If you punch a robot with his power, your arm will shatter into dust. Izuku nodded slowly, committing the words to memory. You use your legs, Haru commanded softly. You rely on your foundation. You rely on what I taught you, and what Rumi taught you. Let the quirk augment your martial arts, not replace them. These boots will protect you when you kick. Izuku reached into the box, pulling out one of the heavy boots. The leather smelled rich and new. The steel was cool to the touch. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Tears pricked Izuku's eyes. He didn't try to stop them this time. He looked up at Haru. Thank you, Haru, Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. For everything. Haru smiled, a rare, genuinely warm expression that completely erased the tiredness from his face. He pulled Izuku into a rough embrace. Make me proud, kid! Not that you haven't already. Hey! Are we doing emotional crap without me? The front door slammed open, miraculously not breaking this time, as Mirko had actually used the handle. The rabbit hero stood in the hallway, wearing a bomber jacket over her leotard, holding a half-eaten carrot. She took one look at Izuku holding the new boots and grinned her terrifying, predatory smile. Oh, hell yes! Mirko cheered, walking over and slapping Izuku on the back hard enough to rattle his teeth. You look like a proper killer now, pup! Put 'em on! It's time to go show those entitled, flashy, quirk-reliant brats what a real fighter looks like. Izuku quickly swapped his red shoes for the armored green combat boots. They fit perfectly. They were heavy, yes, but after months of carrying refrigerators, the weight felt negligible. They felt grounding. They felt like armor. Izuku stood up, stomping his steel-toed boots on the floorboards once. The solid, metallic thud resonated through the apartment. He looked at Haru, the quiet protector of the shadows. He looked at Mirko, the feral queen of the daylight. And deep within his chest, he felt the golden, crackling spark of one for all finally catch fire. Izuku Midoriya grinned, his emerald eyes blazing with a fierce, unbreakable confidence. I'm ready, Izuku said. He turned and walked out the door, bounding toward Yurei, carrying the legacy of the symbol of peace, and the unstoppable, fighting spirit of the Usajiyama bloodline.